What about eating plants, since they're also live organisms?
If we're going to kill a plant to eat, or we're going to kill an animal to eat, is it still the fundamental truth that we have to kill to eat and it's all the same? Are we still being speciesist to, pick killing plants over animals? And I think there's actually some core distinctions here that are really worth making. There's an evolutionary purpose for pain. And that really the ethic that we're looking at here is cause no harm, or cause as little harm as possible, to the point of view of a sentient experience, right? Shattering a rock apart, if the rock doesn't feel anything, isn't an act of violence, even though there was harm from one point of view, but the rock wasn't experiencing, as far as we know about rocks, wasn't experiencing harm. So when we say cause no harm or cause the least amount of harm possible, it's two things capable of experiencing that harm, right? And so there's an evolutionary purpose for pain, which is to be able to move away from something harmful to the organism. Okay, so in all animals, our sensory nerves that take in information, and our motor nerves, our nerves that can then respond to that information, are intimately tied, and they actually co-evolve going up the evolutionary ladder. And so notice that whenever there's a pain response, it will always trigger a motor response of one of two kinds. So either you touch something hot or sharp and you move away from it, or you have a sprained ankle and you make sure not to step on it or not move into it. But the purpose of that pain is to protect the organism because of some response capacity, and that response capacity involves our movement capacity, right? So this is a place where plants and animals fundamentally differ. Plants don't have real-time movement capacity, right? A sunflower can track the sun over the course of a day very slowly, but they don't have the ability to move away from something harmful or to stop moving in some way that's harmful to them. And so there's no evolutionary purpose for pain for them. And it's important to understand that the process of experiencing pain, it's physiologically mediated and it requires a lot of energy. So in us, the pain process is mediated through acetylcholine crossing synaptic gaps, producing an opiate response, an adrenal and sympathetic responses. There's a lot of energy required to experience pain, and that was only selected for because it was advantageous that the creatures who experienced it moved away from harm better or didn't move into harm better, so they actually got through, reproduced better, and natural selection selected for their ability to feel pain, right? If a tree or a plant, the key to how they can gather energy from sunlight, and none of the other animals can, has to do with their ability to be rooted and be able to gather a huge amount of nutrition from the soil, and to be able to support this huge base of foliage that can do all of this photoreception, right? And so because of that, they give up the ability for movement, and with it, there really is no evolutionary purpose for pain, wouldn't have been selected for. That's the first thing. The second thing is that when we look in other animals, we see in their nervous system opiate receptors on their neurons, which have to do with the chemistry of modulating the pain process. And we see that on every animal, all the way down to hinge valve creatures like clams. And they all have the same kinds of opiate structures that indicate the same kinds of pain processes because they have an ability to respond. And the clam is kind of the most simple one, which is they can close up if there's something potentially harmful. That means they have to experience harm, right? Experience something subjectively, and they can open in response to positive stimuli, or at least a lack of negative stimuli. In the plant kingdom, we don't see anything like an opiate kind of chemistry, and we don't see anything response-wise like that. Now, the book, The Secret Life of Plants, and a number of books and studies that have been done that show that plants do show some kind of electrical response to being cut or to other plants being cut or burned in their presence. Doesn't mean plants have no response capacity, but their response capacity is very, very limited relative to animals' response capacity. And so the main kind of thing is if a plant is being cut, it can't stop that from happening, cannot move away from it, can't pull into its turtle shell, can't close its clamshell, can't. What it can do is it can add resins to the sap in that area to be able to stop the loss of sap, right? And so when we see the electrical responses, galvanic responses in plants, we see that they're responding, and we can anthropomorphize that and call it plant screaming, but we don't really see any basis to suspect that the plant is having a subjective experience of pain. Does this mean that plants have no subjective experience at all, no qualia? This is actually at the edge of our scientific knowledge. We don't know. Most neuroscientists say no, plants don't have any experience. Some people have reason to think that they do have experience, but we don't have any reason to think that there's an evolutionary relevance for them or any indication of an actual pain or kind of suffering process, because they couldn't respond to it and they don't show those signs. So that's a major distinction, right? In the process of saying, hey, if I'm taking a plant life here, it's still alive, but am I inducing suffering? And all the indications we have indicate no, and even if so, in a radically different way, right? The other thing that's worth noting is that even if there was some pain or suffering that the plant experienced, when we are eating animals, the animals had to eat plants, and there's some entropy, there's some energy loss in that process, so it's going to take many pounds of plant vegetation to produce a pound of animal vegetation that then the person could eat. And so by supporting the supply and demand chain of eating that animal, you're causing the harm to the animal, plus that towards however many other plants. So that there's really kind of no water held in that argument.